Good evening. Welcome to Metropolitan Community College's 14th Annual Diversity Matters book series. I am James Hawthorne, Director of Veterans Upper Bound. At the time of U.S. Congressman John Lewis's passing in 2020, unprecedented challenges faced our country, but he departed this life with great confidence in our future. In Carry On, Reflections for a New Generation, we experience his final reflections and words of wisdom. Your microphones and chat with other audience members are turned off. Please send questions for our discussion to the leader via your chat to the moderator, which will go to Barb Velasquez, and then she in turn will send them to me. Also, watch the chat for an online evaluation link. Reverend Tremaine Combs is the pastor of the historic Mount Zion Baptist Church of Lincoln, Nebraska. While living and pastoring in the St. Louis metropolitan area, he was involved in the Ferguson Uprising by participating in a cadre of young Black pastors who strove to stand between the protesters and militarized police. He is the founding president of the Lincoln Black Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development. He is a member of the Progressive Ministers Alliance and Black Ministers Association, both of Lincoln, Nebraska. Reverend Combs is a member of the Lincoln branch of the NAACP. He is also a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, the Beta Xi Lambda chapter. He is the author of 2 books, but most importantly, he is a lucky husband of 1 wife and a proud father of 5 children. Please welcome Reverend Tremaine Combs, our discussion leader for Carry On, Reflections for a New Generation.
Hello, everybody. How are you? It is a blessing to be here. I'm so appreciative. I want to thank our good brother, James Hawthorne, for such an awesome introduction. He spoke so highly and with such glowing accolades that I was kind of wondering who he was talking about for a minute. But I'm appreciative for him. We've known him. I've known him for some time. And we are actually both brothers of the same fraternity, the Alpha Phi Fraternity Incorporated. So we are excited to be able to present to you all and just engage in conversation and discussion about this book by John Lewis, Carry On, that was posthumously published after his passing. So with that being said, we just want to go into the PowerPoint presentation that we have here. Excellent. So as we said before, this is simply a gathering of thoughts, a conversation on lessons on good trouble from a good man, simply dealing with and discussing the lessons that we can learn from John Lewis presenting to us his final testament on what is to be valued, what is to be appreciated, and how we are supposed to live in life. I am convinced and I believe that when a person is near the end of their journey, near the end of life, they are able to look at things and look at perspectives and review situations with crystal clear focus and understanding as to what is important and to what is valuable, and then able to pass that on to the next generation. So I want to appreciate. I want to also say again my appreciation to Miss Barbara Velasquez. Amen. Is that how you say it? Please tell me if I said it wrong. Perfect. Amen. Excellent. And Dr. Cynthia Gooch Grayson for making this opportunity available to me. So without further ado, I really want to start with some background as it relates to the Honorable John Lewis, who was a congressman from the state of Georgia. He was born in Troy, Alabama in 1940, and was born within a region of the country that experienced both de jure and de facto segregation. That means that segregation at that point in time was not just a situation dealing with culture, but also enshrined and codified by law. So the segregation, the Jim Crow system was a system that engaged in rampant racism, rampant physical exploitation, and really terrorism that all lifted up and built up an understanding of white supremacy. He was born to parents that were sharecroppers. Sharecropping was an economic system that really thrived on the economic exploitation and terrorism of a particular group of people to keep them bound on a certain social and political and economic ladder. It's very interesting that when you look at this period of time, as we look at John Lewis's situation that he was born from, it's amazing how he was able to be elevated to such high heights, not just of political power, not just of social prestige, but the high heights of understanding life in the way that he did as he wrote this book. I am convinced that Congressman Lewis had the heart of a philosopher, and that heart of the philosopher allowed him to not just take the situations that came his way, but he was able to discern and understand the meat and the lesson from certain situations. So as we move forward, we also see that Congressman Lewis experienced a taste of Northern desegregation on a visit to Buffalo, New York in the 1950s. He expressed in the book, Carry On, that this was a watershed moment for him when he was able to see that there was another way of living. There was another way of being. There was another way of operating in the world. Now, to be fair and to be honest, the North was not the promised land for African Americans. To be honest, the North had segregation, had racism, had white supremacy as well, but it did not have as much legal segregation as the South, even though there was still a strong economic, political, and cultural segregation. And that begs the question, really, how bad was segregation in the South when the experiences of Northern segregation felt like freedom? Let's ponder that for a moment. How bad was the situation in the South? How bad was the economic situation? How bad was the political climate? How bad was the social reality? How bad was the cultural reality that African Americans at that time had to exist in and operate through? That the segregation of the North felt like freedom. That the mistreatment in the North was so unlike the mistreatment in the South that it seemed as if they were treated well in the North. That's a question to ponder because I think sometimes as we move away from that historical reality, as we move away from that situation in our country, sometimes we run the risk of becoming ahistorical as it relates to understanding the pain and the pathos and the chaos of that particular situation, that particular reality. Simply put, if I can put a personal spin on it, this allows me, I can relate to John Lewis in this situation because my grandfather, who died in 2004, not too long ago, grew up in a sharecropping situation, and his family had to escape at night to get away from that reality. So when we operate and think as if John Lewis's situation and the reality and the cultural realities, the historical realities that shaped John Lewis and his being, we cannot ever assume that they were so long ago that they are still not affecting situations right now. So as we move forward, he met the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In 1958. Several years after Montgomery bus boycott. And what's amazing about this is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King became a pivotal a mentor and role model for Congressman Lewis during his time as chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC. It's amazing to me that John Lewis was a part of the Big Six, those being James Farmer, Roy Wilkins, Whitney Young, and Dr. King, and others that were integral and important as it relates to the developing civil rights movement. And that should also shed a light on the civil rights movement as itself, that oftentimes when we look at the civil rights movement from this projection and this day and age, we like to assume that the civil rights movement was this monolithic reality, where the reality is the civil rights movement, as C.T. Vivian talks about in his book on Black struggle. The civil rights movement was a collection, was a hodgepodge of local movements that were managed as best as they possibly could by local entities that tried to establish some type of overarching vision as it relates to the civil rights movement and civil struggle. He was trained in nonviolent direct action by the Reverend James Lawson, who is a giant of nonviolent philosophy and direct action. He was one of the original freedom riders out of Nashville that was beaten and suffered for the freedom of African Americans in places like South Carolina and Birmingham, Alabama. In 1963, as a part of the Big Six, he organized the March on Washington. And I love the fact that in his conversation on orientation, he dealt with the fact that the real architect of the March on Washington was Baynard Rustin, who was an openly gay African American, and people tried to distance themselves from Baynard Rustin based upon his orientation. But I am convinced and I am appreciative of the work of Baynard Rustin as the architect of that March on Washington, as one of the architects of the movement on nonviolence. That really gave Dr. King, even in the early days of the civil rights movement, as he operated in the Montgomery bus boycott, a real strong methodology in nonviolent direct action. Dr. John Lewis led protesters during the 1965 march from Selma, Alabama on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, known as Bloody Sunday. In the 1970s, John Lewis led the Voters Information Project, Education Project. And in 1980, from 1985, he served as a member of Atlanta City Council, and he was elected from that position to Congress in 1986, serving until his death in 2020. We did all of that, this background information, because oftentimes we don't understand the words that people say until we are really ready to understand the place that people come from. We cannot understand people without first understanding their background and understanding their history. I believe that this is important for us to understand and think about as it relates to diversity, that when it comes to diversity is not just simply about having people different from you in a particular location, but it's about appreciating, it's about enjoying, it's about respecting the great differences and perspectives that come about because we all have come through different situations. We all have lived in different historical realities, but the one thing that keeps us connected is our common humanity. So I believe John Lewis's story has a lot to teach us as it relates to developing and understanding a clear framework for how we appreciate diversity, for how we work for diversity, for how we fight for diversity, and how we are made better because of diversity. Now, I want to get into some reflections upon the book that we have here. Y'all forgive me, my thumbs are bigger than one of the reflections that I have from the book is this. The first reflection is, it is crucial for one generation to leave something to the next generation that relates to why life should be lived in a certain way. It's very important. It is very impactful for one generation as they move off the scene. To leave some type of legacy, not simply a legacy that's rooted in materialism, not simply a legacy that's rooted in economics, but a legacy that's rooted in a philosophy of life. Why should life be lived in a particular fashion and in a certain way? What are the benefits of living life from the place and from the location of nonviolent direct action? What are the benefits of living life from a place of valuing diversity? What are the benefits of living life from the place of seeing and recognizing that all of us share a common humanity, even when other people are blinded to that reality? What are the benefits of living life from the location, of recognizing, as John Lewis says in his book, Carry On, that we are all children of God? Now, in the book, Congressman Lewis does not deal with life from a materialistic philosophy. Matter of fact, he says very plainly that in his life, he did not live his life from the location and from the standpoint of accruing wealth and accruing materials. But he saw that there was more to life than what people can imagine and what people can see, taste, or feel. There's more to life than what we can gather from our collective senses, that there are intangible realities that are just as important as the physical and materialistic realities that we oftentimes see ourselves rooted in. Now, a thing about materialism that I'm using here, we're not talking about materialism from the standpoint of stuff, but we're talking about materialism from the philosophical standpoint that the world that we see and the world that we touch and the world that we can interact with our senses is all that there is. John Lewis, I believe, was able to accomplish what he accomplished because he understood that there is an intangible reality that gives the world that we live in its strength, its focus, its structure, and its integrity. And he also, in understanding that, allowed me to come to the understanding as I read this book more deeply and more profoundly, that why we live is just as important as how we live. Let's ponder that question let's ponder that thought for a minute. That the why is just as important as the how. That oftentimes in the pragmatic nature of American reality, we can sometimes get so caught up in how we do things that we can forget why we should do them. And John Lewis brings to stark reality and puts it in great living color that why we do something is crucial to who we are, to how we live, and to how we are beings in the world. Another reflection that I have from reading the book is this: it is critical to ponder the philosophy of being and living that informs how we make decisions and deal with reality and life itself. We have to ask the question, what is our undergirding philosophy that informs our thinking, that informs our living, that informs our feeling and informs our being? Every person has a particular underlying philosophy that gives warp and woof to who they are and to how they live in the world. And it's important for us to ponder why we do what we do and what philosophical reality is undergirding what we do and who we are. Congressman Lewis also serves as a powerful elder and now ancestor that models something that I think is powerful, in that he models the ability to look at the past through the lens of wisdom and critical reflection, but to look forward to the future with hope and without a cynicism. I believe that John Lewis allows us to see that it's important for us to learn from the places that we have been, but it's also important for us to never get so bogged down in life, to never get so bogged down in our situations that we eye the future with cynicism and not hope. Congressman Lewis, to me, he's not just simply a politician. He's not just simply a member of Congress. He's not just an activist versed in protest. He's not just a civil rights icon. Congressman Lewis, first and foremost, from reading this book, is a moral philosopher. That Congressman Lewis, to me, if there was ever an opportunity for us to experience, what Plato expresses in his Republic, the philosopher king, the philosopher that leads and gives wisdom, insight, and rulership to a particular people and to a particular place. If there was ever in the American ethos a philosopher who was also one who shaped not just legislation, but the lives of people around him, it's John Lewis. John Lewis was a moral philosopher. John Lewis was also a theologian. As you read, carry on. First, let me back up. I am of the party in the position that one is not a theologian just because they read theology, that one is not a theologian just because they engage in an academic discipline, that one is not a theologian just because they can quote a few scripture verses, or they can quote some obscure text from John Calvin or Martin Luther. That one is a theologian instead, when, as Evagrius of Pontus expresses, that one is a theologian when one truly prays. And prayer is rooted all in throughout John Lewis's Carry On. The way that he understands reality, the way that he is able to forgive those who mistreated him, the way that he is able to love even those who sought to oppress him, is an indication to me of a soul that is vested and dripped with the ability to pray. And if there is the ability to pray, then there is also the ability to be undergirded and strengthened by the divine reality that also undergirds the reality that gives us function and gives us being and gives us purpose. But also I see here, not only is John Lewis a philosopher, a moral philosopher that gives us a moral reality that frames and keeps us bound within the framework of a righteousness and a justice that operates for the public good. He's not just a theologian that you can see knows the Lord, to use the Black church parlance, but he's also a preacher, in the sense that he was never done proclaiming the good news of a reality that is rooted in justice, of a reality that's rooted in love, a reality that's rooted in peace, a reality that's rooted in giving all people the opportunity to fulfill and operate in life from their God-given purpose. So based upon those three things, I am convinced that John Lewis did not have a situational ethic, or he did not engage in situational actions, that everything he did was undergirded by a clear philosophical understanding that things will be better than they are today, that tomorrow will be greater than the situation that we are in, that all of us are children of God, and that all of us are deserving of love, peace, and the prosperity that comes from right government and moral treatment. So based upon that, I believe his way of life deserves discussion and emulation. After reading this book, I am convinced that John Lewis ought to be studied, not just by political scientists. He ought to be studied also by philosophers. He ought to be studied by theologians. He ought to be studied by people that engage in social psychology. He ought to be studied in every area and every endeavor, because from what I've read of this great man, he has touched every aspect of human life, and has seen in those aspects of human life the inherent goodness that is rooted in creation, imitating and emulating his great teacher and mentor, Dr. King, who said that even though the arc of the universe is long, it still bends towards justice. So what lessons, based upon my reflections, right? So we engage in reading, then we engage in reflection, and then we distill those reflections into certain lessons, right? So these are some of the things that I have learned. This is not an exhaustive list on the things that I have learned in reading this book. It's just something that I wanted to lift up to help spark some conversation, to help spark some curiosity as it relates to Congressman Lewis. The first lesson that I learned was the importance of identifying what a good day looks like. The importance of identifying what a good day looks like. I believe the words of Aristotle that greatness is a habit. That greatness is something that we not are but thrust into, but it's something that we habitually engage in every moment and every day of our lives. So that requires that we know what a good day is. How do we know when we've had a good day? How do we know when we have been victorious in particular situations? So with that, I believe that this helps counteract sometimes the reality of some people that seem to see their life moving from drudgery to drudgery, seem to see their life moving from problem to problem. Congressman Lewis, I told you, he's a philosopher. He makes mention of the fact that there is a way of understanding what a good day is, understanding that if you have fought for the justice and the freedom of somebody else, understanding that if you have made somebody else's load a little bit lighter, from the understanding that if you have done some good, no matter how small it may seem in the eyes of others, you have done a good day. And with all those good days working together, imagine what life would be like if all of us had the understanding that a good day is not if things went well for me, but if I was able to be a catalyst for something going well for somebody else. If a good day was I was able to operate from a position and a posture of justice, making somebody else's oppressive load a little bit lighter. How different would our world be? How, not just our world, how different would our cities be? How different would our nation be if that was the criteria of having a good day? The next thing I learned from Congressman Lewis, Honorable John Lewis, is the significance of having the right mentor for the fulfillment of your purpose. I am convinced that mentorship is critical and mentorship is crucial. And I'm also convinced, however, that oftentimes the rugged individualism of the American experiment sometimes precludes us from looking towards or looking to having mentors. That there's the mentality that we ought to be able to do it by ourselves. There's the mentality that we ought to be able to pull up ourselves by our own bootstraps. There's the mentality that if we we ought not to be able, that if we have to share our success, then the success really doesn't belong to us. But John Lewis's life reveals to us that success is not measured by what you do yourself, but success is measured by the caliber and the quality of the people that surround you. The importance of having heroes. He lifted up that Mahatma Gandhi was his hero. That not only was Dr. King a mentor and a hero, but there was somebody that he was able to look up to as a hero. And one of the things that I see in this work, Carry On, John Lewis presents to us, he mentions Dr. King over and over. He mentions Mahatma Gandhi. He mentions other key and prominent people in the civil rights movement. And he's not name dropping, but what he's doing is he's expressing the importance of having heroes, because who we look up to informs who we will be. Then he expresses the value, and I learned this from reading about John Lewis, the value of good trouble in shaping our lives. We ought not be scared of good trouble if good trouble causes a just outcome for somebody else. Oftentimes people see certain injustices, see certain inequities, see certain issues, see certain oppression, but they are hamstrung from doing anything because they are simply afraid of getting into trouble. They are afraid of rocking the boat. They are afraid of what they may lose by doing what is right. But John Lewis's life reveals to us the value of good trouble in shaping our lives to engage in just and equitable outcomes. I'm thankful that John Lewis was not afraid of good trouble. I'm thankful that John Lewis was not afraid of being beaten and mistreated to the point of having his skull fractured on the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday. Because so many of us are able to be in the rooms and able to live the particular realities that we have now, because people like John Lewis were not afraid of good trouble. The next thing I learned is the significance of hope and faith in the pursuit of just outcomes. That the work of justice is the work of hope. That we don't work for justice from a pessimistic perspective. You can't work towards justice with pessimism. You have to have a certain degree of hope. You have to have a certain degree of appreciation that even though things may be dark and dreary now, things will be better tomorrow. He expresses that as he grew up. He talked about growing up, having this dogged understanding and appreciation that things will always be better tomorrow. But we also see the importance and the power of spirituality to affect direct and lasting change. I think in the American experiment, because I believe that there are times where we regulate spirituality to particular areas and particular venues, not recognizing that spirituality affects us, and it's in many ways our spirituality gives a breath and ability to the things that we think and to the things that we believe and the things that we value. So, excuse me, we cannot shortchange the importance of spirit and operating and living for justice. Then there is the importance of the value of learning. Congressman Lewis's perspective on learning touched me. It was very profound to me because he didn't see learning as simply getting credentials. He didn't see learning as simply getting a degree to put on the wall. He didn't see learning as an opportunity to advance economic outcomes. He didn't see learning as an opportunity to advance knowledge. He saw learning as an opportunity to grow so that we can help somebody else. And that's a powerful perspective, that our learning is not really learning until we are learning to be more human and learning to be able to see the common humanity that connects each and every one of us. And from that place of commonality, work for justice from a position of love. That true learning should push us to seek to make the world better because we love our fellow human beings and we want the world to be a better place when we leave than when we first found it. Then there is the necessity of humility and being unafraid. That as I read John Lewis's work, I was struck by his deep humility. I was struck by the fact that he never gave himself accolades. I was struck by the fact that he never took himself too seriously. I was struck by the fact that he was always willing to extend credit to others and take blame himself. To me, I think that is the high point of leadership. That's the high point of the ability to lead and to develop and to grow certain realities and certain outcomes and situations. Having a deep respect and humility, understanding that you're not the only person in the room. You're not the only brain in the room. You're not the only individual in the room. Appreciating the various differences that we bring and the strengths that each one of us have. Based upon John Lewis's work, I am convinced that the only way somebody can work for a deeper and more robust diversity is if they have a deep humility. They want other people to have a voice. They want other people to be able to speak. They want other people to have their strengths seen so that we all can be stronger together. So with that, just that little short presentation, I want to ask: is there any questions that we have on this great work and on this great man?
Dr. Combs, thank you so much for that information that you provided regarding this piece, Carry On, by the late Congressman John Lewis, Reflections for a New Generation. I do have one question here, and I think there are others that are coming in too, so I'll start with this one. Mm-hmm. The book has 37 different topics. In your opinion, which of the themes do you think are the most important for the next generation to continue John Lewis's work?
What do I think are the most important? I think that the first one that's important. Well, the truth be told, they're all very important. But the first one that I would say first in order of importance would be the ability to have mentors. I think that oftentimes the next generation, we do not have the adequate relationships with older persons or seasoned persons to affect a long-lasting and beneficial mentorships. I think that being a mentor is more than just having somebody assigned to you, but being a mentor means that you live life together in a way that somebody can glean from your experiences. Somebody can glean from the realities that you've lived through. And it's a way of passing on the information, passing on the knowledge, passing on the way of living that will allow future generations to not just find value, but to find meaning and worth in the world that we live in. The next one is the importance of heroes. I firmly believe that who we label and who we list as our heroes is deeply responsible to how we are and how we live in life. I think the next one that I think is important is the one on activism, on developing a heart and a mindset to engage in activism, not simply because there is excitement, but because there is a wrong that needs to be righted, and you do it from a place and a posture of love. The next one for me is the deep humility in recognizing that everyone has a part to play, that there's no what's the old adage, there's no I in team, right? But there is a me, but that me has to be connected to other people. The next one I would say is forgiveness. I think that the culture that we live in right now, we have a hard time forgiving. And it's easy to have a hard time forgiving if you have a materialistic philosophy that leads you to think that the only thing that is what you see. You know, the next one I would say is important is and this may shock some people, is on death. When he speaks about being unafraid of dying. I remember my grandfather, my father's father, used to say this, that when a person is not afraid to die, there's really nothing you can do to them. That when a person is not afraid to die, there is nothing you can do to them. There is a sense of freedom that comes from being unafraid of death. There is a sense of hope that comes from being unafraid of death. And here's my thing. I believe also that we really cannot carry on. We can't read John Lewis's words without understanding how deeply influenced he was by African-American Christianity and the Black church. That deep spirituality that resonates with the fact that trouble don't last always. And you can't be afraid to die because death is not the end of life's journey. So those are the ones that I would say are the most important.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Reverend Combs. Another question. What can be done to help others get to learning?
What can be done to help others get to learning? I think the first thing we have to do is we have to model that type of learning. People see what they do. I mean, you know, I know that we like to believe the Enlightenment reality, the Enlightenment understanding that if you know better, you do better. But the reality is people do what they see. People do what they are exposed to. And I think that oftentimes in our culture, we have exposed people to the idea of learning as a means of acquiring economic benefit, political power, and social prestige. We have not looked at learning, even we have not even looked at learning from the standpoint of many of the models that our great universities have. You know what I'm saying? I mean that they have plastered all over everything. You know what I'm saying? I have yet to see the university whose motto says, come to school to get a job and make money. Instead, it's come and learn, be a part of a learning community that seeks to probe and ask deep questions, so that our understanding of reality can be broadened and our appreciation for who we are and where we are can be stretched. And so I think that we need to get back to that understanding of learning, and we have to model that understanding of learning. We have to push children and young people to understand that learning is not just about necessarily what you do in the classroom, but learning is about what you do with your life, that you are a lifelong learner. So those are some of the things that I think we can do. And also get back to the understanding of learning having a rich spiritual component. That when we learn, when we truly grow and develop, it's not about resources. It's not about the acquisition of power. It's not about the acquisition of position. It's about making things better for those who come behind us.
Awesome. Awesome. Another question that was posited. Lewis spoke of the difficulty to produce if your inner life is in turmoil. He said he prayed daily to help him focus. As a pastor, do you have suggestions for helping those whose life are in chaos and might be helped by prayer or daily meditation?
Do I have suggestions? No, I'm just playing. But yes, I do. Matter of fact, one of the things that I believe is this. At full disclosure, I'm a pastor. I'm a Baptist pastor. I'm a Christian of the Baptist tradition, and I believe that when the Lord Jesus gave us the Christian faith, He did not necessarily. I know people say it's a relationship, but I don't think He just gave us a relationship. I think He gave us a therapeutic method, a therapeutic technology for the healing of the human soul, and for dealing with issues of oppression. We can't lose sight of the fact that the Christian faith that informs me, informed Dr. King, informed John Lewis, was first birthed in a backwater of the Roman Empire that was dealing with oppression, and it was dealing with as Howard Thurman expressed in Jesus and the Disinherited, was dealing with people of color who were being oppressed. So it's all so one of the things that we have to do is one, allow ourselves to go back to the sources, allow ourselves to go back to the roots of our faiths, allow ourselves to go back to the rich heritage that we have of spirituality, of prayer and discernment and understanding, but also to engage in clear and regular discipline as it relates to dealing with the chaos in our lives. One of the things that as the person lifted up in their statement, that John Lewis made prayer a discipline. Prayer was not a periodic thing. Prayer was not a thing that he did every once in a while or every now and again. Prayer was something that he engaged in with deep intentionality, with deep purpose, and deep regularity. I think oftentimes we have lost sight of the fact that there are no quick fixes in life. I think that that's sometimes the issue that we have in our society. We are looking for the next great thing. We are looking for the next great person. We are looking for the biggest situation, the next big situation, all the while trying to fill this spiritual hole that makes us think that there are quick fixes to our particular situations. There are no quick fixes. There's only the work of being intentional, only the work of being disciplined, only the work of doing things, not just simply from a practical position, but doing things from a purposeful perspective. So approaching spiritual life, approaching prayer, approaching spiritual disciplines, the reading of sacred texts, having a regimented prayer life. The early church used to call it having a rule of life, right? That there is something that I do on a consistent and constant basis to keep me from losing sight of who I am and my purpose.
Awesome. Awesome. One of the things that you posited during your presentation this evening, Dr. Combs, you mentioned success is measured by the quality of people who are around you. In this present world that we live in, there are often times where people are very selective in who they will allow to be in their space and or who they believe should have certain rights. Can you speak to your thought on this and how you feel Lewis kind of exposed ways that we can be more inclusive? Because you did talk about the work of justice and how closely it is tied to what he presented.
Well, simply put, I'd say it like this. How can you love and be exclusive?
Mm.
I think that the issue is that we have a very truncated understanding of love. We have a truncated understanding of success. That success is sometimes too monetarily driven and too economically focused. That success is too rooted in prestige and person and our individuality. But I think that Lewis shows us that success is instead rooted in personhood. And here's the catch about personhood. We are persons in community. That we become who we are based upon the communities that we allow ourselves to be shaped by. So one of the things that we have to recognize and understand is that if we want to grow and if we want to develop, we cannot shortchange ourselves or other people by being myopic as it relates to who we allow to have access to us, who we allow to, who, you know what I'm saying, who we allow into our circles.
That's good. It was amazing to read Lewis's comments on how they, as protesters, did not just show up and march, but trained for the experience and had a solid plan. He stated that they learned how to respond by having liquids poured on them, what expressions to make, how to non-verbally communicate with those who harass them, beat, or otherwise endeavored to harm them. Do you believe, in general, today's protest efforts have adequate training and plans?
I would say that in some regards, today's protest has adequate training. I think what is lacking, if I can be bold to say it, I think what is lacking in today's protest is the spiritual component. I think that we lose sight of the fact that if you go back and you read Reverend Lawson, if you go back and read Dr. King's Why We Can't Wait, if you go back and read Dr. King's Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos and Community, if you go back and read Reverend C.T. Vivian, if you go back and read those sources and go back and read Andrew Young and Maynard Jackson and even Whitney Young to a certain degree, who fun fact, actually developed his organizational chops in the city of Omaha. If you go back and read those people and those persons, go back and read a Nanny Helen Burroughs, go back and read Mary McLeod Bethune, go back and read those persons of that generation. It was not just about getting the training to do something. It was about having a undergirding of spirit that allowed you to understand the vision that you were working towards and going for so that you could go through the training in the first place. I think what's lacking is not training resources, but the spiritual reality that can properly enliven protest movements today.
Thank you for that. Another question just came in. Dr. Combs, you stated why we live is just as important as how we live. Knowing the history of what we read about Lewis and his life and knowing the oppression and struggles of today, what comparisons and contrasts and how can we apply the old wisdom to current hope?
Well, first and foremost, I'm not a doctor. Point number one. But I appreciate the honor given. I appreciate the honor given in that regard. You know what I'm saying? But I don't want to shortchange those that get earned doctorates. Amen. But to say that, saying all that, how do we juxtapose the realities that Lewis went through and the realities that we exist in now. I think from the standpoint that we recognize that evil and oppression don't take a holiday, that we recognize that there is never an end to this fight. There is never an end to the fight of justice. There's never an end to the fight of righteousness. There is never an end to living a life of love. And I think oftentimes Lewis's generation was able to recognize the perpetual nature of that fight and that purpose, while many in our generation are looking for an end date. When the reality is, if they're as long as they're human beings, there's no end date to that fight, to that reality. Because as long as they're human beings, there's always going to be somebody that needs to be loved. There's always going to be somebody that needs to have equity. There's always going to be somebody that needs to recognize the oppression that they exist in. There's always going to be somebody that will sometimes seek to use obscure characteristics as a means of achieving superiority and supremacy. There's always going to be these battles and these fights. So the question is that we have to learn to recognize and learn to apply having a certain degree of strength and endurance. I think that's the key to this situation here, as it relates to marrying John Lewis's generation and what they learned and the wisdom that they had to the generations that exist that are dealing with situations now, and in many ways similar situations, like ripped out of, like, I don't know. My disclosure, my grandparents used to get old Jet magazine, right? Some of you that are African American may remember Jet magazine, and so I remember reading my grandfather and grandmother's Jet magazines from the 1960s and the 1970s, where they talked about a different perspective on the civil rights movement than some people got during that day and age on popular media. They talked about the different realities that people were dealing with, whether it was the Black Panthers or or things of that nature. And it's funny that what we're dealing with in 2020 and 21 could have been ripped from the pages of Jet magazine in 1965, because the struggle never stops. The fight is always on, and the bell has yet to be unrung. So the issue is that, to me, the issue is not, as we going back to the other question a few questions ago, the issue is not training. Yes, training is important, but what's the point of having training if you don't have any endurance? Mm-hmm. And so what happens is, I think, going back to, as John Lewis expressed throughout the book, going back to the anchor of the scriptures, we are told in Galatians to not be weary in well-doing. Well, to not grow weary in doing what is right and what is just. Now, the key to that is, Paul says that in Galatians, because there will be moments where you will get weary. Mm-hmm. But that's where the spirituality has to come in to undergird and to strengthen. So that's my answer to that question.
Thank you, Reverend Combs. Just looking over things here. All right. Are there any more questions that anyone would like to pose? If so, please send those to Mrs. Barbara Velasquez, and she'll send those on to me. I do have another question here. Reverend Combs, you did mention that there is a way of understanding what a good day looks like. You mentioned operating from a position and a posture of justice. Can you tell us, what are your views or thoughts relative to Lewis and him exemplifying, a posture of justice as a political figure? Because we've seen some political figures who demonstrate or exemplify something that looks completely opposite to that.
I think that Lewis did this, and to answer that question, I have to go to Simone Weil, who expresses the fact that justice is the outworking of compassion. That justice is the outworking of compassion. John Lewis was compassionate, even in Congress.
Mm,
that he did not play political hardball just to win. That he, you know what I'm saying, that he was willing he was not willing to sacrifice his ideals. He was stubborn and strong in his ideals, but he always had his ideals rooted and grounded in how I can be the most compassionate in this particular situation.
mm, mm.
And I think that's why I think John Lewis can give us much insight, even in the political realm, asking the question of what it means to be compassionate. Because at the end of the day, my father, my late father, Reverend Dr. Michael W. Combs, was a political science professor. He was a political scientist, and he expressed the fact that politics is simply the question of what resources do we have and who gets to decide to do what with our resources. But as a presenter of the gospel of Jesus Christ, as a minister, I would add the caveat, and I'm sure that he would agree as a fellow pastor himself. You also have to ask the question, how can I be the most compassionate with the resources that have been allotted to me to the persons that, here is key, have been placed in my path in this moment?
Mm. That's good, Reverend Combs. So here's our last question for the evening.
Mhm.
In addition to being a good example, how would you suggest someone teach others humbleness as a trait in the verge of extinction and a strength and not as a weakness?
Well, I would say, from a Christian perspective, it's recognizing the cruciform nature of the gospel, recognizing the irony of the cross, recognizing that God is his strongest when it seems like God is God is at his weakest. And I think that that's the reality that sometimes we have to bring to bear. That it is when we are able and willing to give our lives for another, when we are able and willing to live from the perspective that other people value, because that's really what humility is, right? Understanding that other people value, other people matter, that other people have value, right? That's why sometimes, just to put a point on it, that's why sometimes I think people who try to express, when Black Lives Matter is lifted up, well, all lives matter, don't understand how tone deaf they sound, especially when they're dealing with a particular situation where a Black man or Black woman has been either shot by law enforcement or murdered in the street, by people who assume that just because they're white, they should be able to tell them to stop running and jogging. Because at the end of the day, they don't understand how that sounds to the African American ear, because what you're saying to me is that I don't matter. And that's not a position of humility. That's a position of arrogance. That arrogance says that what I value matters over to the exclusion of everything and everyone else.
Mm.
But humility says other people have value, other people have worth. And how can I go about being used to see that purpose, value, and worth lived out to its fullest potential in somebody else? So you have to, like I said, Lewis was a philosopher. So you have to start with the philosophical question of what humility is. What does humility look like? What does humility sound like? What does humility feel like? And then you have to model that and express that to other people.
Thank you, Reverend Combs, for this enlightening discussion. And thank you for leading our discussion this evening and bringing your experiences and such thoughtful considerations forward for our audience to consider. Audience members, may the bright spirit and courage of John Lewis live on in each of your lives. If you haven't yet had the chance to read Carry On, please contact the MCC libraries to secure your copy. If you would please at this time put up the evaluation slide. As a reminder, we will appreciate your feedback on our online evaluation found in the chat.
If I could say something, uh,
Certainly.
Brother Hoffa, I have to say again, I'm so appreciative for this opportunity, and I want to thank Dr. Cynthia Gooch Grayson. I want to thank Miss Barbara Velquez, and I want to thank you, Brother Hawthorne, and everyone in the Metropolitan Community College of Omaha community, and those are part of the larger community who participated in this. I am so wowed and floored by the opportunity to present to you. So thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Reverend Combs, for everything that you imparted into us this evening. We truly appreciate it. It's time to start reading our next book, The Night Watchman, described by the New York Journal of Books as a story of resilience, in which magic and harsh realities collide in a breathtaking but ultimately satisfying way. From Tampa Bay Times, no one can break your heart and fill it with light quite like Louise Eldridge. Oprah Magazine, her intimate knowledge of Native American world in collision with the white world has allowed her over more than a dozen books to create brilliantly realized alternate history. We look forward to seeing you on Thursday, January 6th at 2 p.m. for this discussion led by Dr. Barbara Robbins, Assistant Professor of English at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. And tomorrow, our final program of 2022, a documentary entitled A Home Called Nebraska, will be screened at 2:15 p.m. Central Standard Time. Discussion leaders are Dr. Mary Umberger, Board Chair, and Vermixi Ruiz de Chavez, attorney from Omaha's Immigrant Legal Center. See you tomorrow. Please have a good evening.